There is a rule that has governed life on Earth for 500 million years. The sky belongs to the small. Birds, bats, insects. Flying requires lightness, and lightness means vulnerability. Every creature that has ever taken to the air has done so by sacrificing mass, sacrificing armor, sacrificing raw physical power. The sky is the domain of the fast and the fragile. The ground belongs to the powerful. This rule has held without exception across every ecosystem, every era, every continent. The most dangerous things alive have always been the heaviest things alive. And the heaviest things alive have always kept their feet on the ground. Until one island decided the rules did not apply. On a small patch of land surrounded by the ancient Tethys Sea, in what is now Romania, the order of the natural world was turned completely upside down. Here, the creatures that should have been prey had become predators. The creatures that should have stayed on the ground had taken to the sky. And the things that flew had grown large enough to swallow a horse. Whole. This is not a story about a flying creature. This is a story about a place, a valley sealed off from the rest of the world by ocean, where evolution ran a completely separate experiment for millions of years, where the sky became the most dangerous place on Earth, and where creatures that looked like they belonged in a nightmare hunted things that looked like they belonged in a zoo. This is the Valley of Death, and nothing that entered it, not on foot, not on wing, not even the distant cousins of T-Rex, left unchanged. Let's go in. 66 million years ago, Europe did not exist as we know it. Where the continent now stands was an archipelago, a scattered chain of tropical islands rising from the warm, shallow Tethys Sea. No Alps, no Rhine, no continuous landmass. Just isolated patches of jungle and swamp, separated by stretches of open ocean that most land animals could never cross. One of these islands was Hateg. Approximately 80,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of modern-day Austria, Hateg Island sat isolated in the middle of this ancient sea. It had rivers, it had forests. It had a warm, humid climate that supported dense vegetation and abundant plant life. What it did not have was connection to the outside world. And in evolutionary biology, isolation is not just geography, it is destiny. On the mainland continents in North America, in Asia, in South America, the rules of the natural world operated normally. Large herbivores were kept in check by large carnivores. Apex predators competed with each other across vast territories. The ecological pyramid was broad at the base and narrow at the top, as it always has been. On Hateg Island, cut off from all of this by open ocean, a different experiment began. The herbivores arrived first, probably as accidental island colonizers, animals that crossed open water on debris, or during unusually low sea levels millions of years earlier. Among them were sauropods, the long-necked giants whose mainland relatives, Argentinosaurus and Patagotitan, were the largest land animals that ever walked the Earth, reaching lengths of 30 meters and weights approaching 80 tons. On Hateg Island, those same lineages faced a brutal mathematical reality. Finite food, finite space, finite resources. The individuals that needed less food survived better. The individuals that were smaller required less energy. Generation by generation, the selective pressure pushed in one direction only. Smaller, smaller, smaller. The result was Megalosaurus, a sauropod that belonged to the same family as the 80-ton giants of South America, but had been compressed over millions of years of island pressure into something the size of a large horse. 800 kilograms. Its neck was shorter than a giraffe's. Its body fit in a modern living room. A lineage that had shaken the ground with every footstep had been miniaturized into something a large predator could swallow without effort. And that created a problem, or rather, an opportunity. The island had prey, slow, small, defenseless prey that had lost the evolutionary pressure to develop the defensive adaptations their mainland cousins had. Megalosaurus had no armor, no horns, no speed. It was, in essence, a large, gentle animal wandering through a forested island with no natural enemies. Until the sky arrived. The pterosaurs that colonized Hateg Island were members of the Ajdarchidae, the largest flying animals that have ever existed on this planet. On the mainland, Ajdarchids were already impressive. Broad-winged, long-necked, skilled thermal soaring predators that patrolled coastlines and river systems, using their long beaks to snatch fish, small reptiles, and hatchling dinosaurs from the water's edge. They were large. Some mainland species reached wingspans of 10 to 11 meters wider than many modern aircraft, but they were still following the fundamental rule of flight. Large wingspan, long slender neck, lightweight hollow bones, bodies optimized for aerial efficiency. On Hateg Island, that began to change. With no large theropod carnivores, no T-Rex equivalent, no pack-hunting raptors, the ecological niche of apex predator was completely empty. And nature, as it always does when a niche is empty, filled it. The Ajdarchids on Hateg found themselves in a world where their mainland advantages, the ability to flee predators, the need to stay light enough to escape, were irrelevant. There was nothing to flee from. What mattered now was not escape, but pursuit. Not light enough to fly, but heavy enough to dominate. The evolutionary pressure reversed. Bigger meant better access to prey. Heavier meant harder to drive away from a carcass. More muscular meant more capable of subduing the small dinosaurs that wandered the island's clearings. The result was Hatzegopteryx. And Hatzegopteryx is where the rules of biology appear to stop making sense. Its wingspan reached 10 to 12 meters. So far, consistent with its mainland relatives. But the similarities end there. The neck of a typical Ajdarchid, take Quetzalcoatlus as the standard, was long, slender, hollow-walled, elegant. The cervical vertebrae were thin tubes, designed to minimize weight while providing reach. Beautiful engineering for a creature that needed to snatch prey quickly from the water's surface. The neck of Hatzegopteryx was a different object entirely. Researchers Darren Naish and Mark Whitten, analyzing fossilized cervical vertebrae from Romania, found something that initially seemed impossible. Hatzegopteryx's neck bones were 3 times thicker and wider than those of comparable-sized relatives. The bone walls were not thin tubes. They were dense, reinforced with an internal network of spongy trabeculae, a biological foam and steel composite that distributed impact force across the entire structure. This was not a neck for reaching. This was a neck for hitting. And above that neck sat a skull 3 meters long, longer than a car, wider at the jaw joint than a human's shoulders are broad. A beak not slender and precise like tweezers, but broad and heavy like a geological hammer, an instrument designed not for picking but for striking. Hatzegopteryx did not evolve to catch prey with precision. It evolved to kill prey with impact. Here is the problem. Hatzegopteryx weighed an estimated 250 to 300 kilograms, the mass of 3 adult men, the mass of a Bengal tiger. And classical aerodynamic models, the physics that governed our understanding of animal flight for most of the 20th century, placed the absolute maximum for a flying creature capable of powered flight at approximately 40 to 70 kilograms. Hatzegopteryx was 4 to 7 times over that limit. By the physics as we understood them, Hatzegopteryx could not fly. It was too heavy. Its muscles could not generate sufficient lift. Gravity would win. The physics were wrong. Or rather, the physics were right, but they were being applied to a creature that had evolved solutions to the problem that no modern animal uses. Solution 1. Materials engineering. Hatzegopteryx's bones were hollow to a degree that has no parallel in modern animals. The walls of its limb bones, in some sections, were only a few millimeters thick, as thin as the walls of a paper cup. But inside those thin walls ran a lattice of struts, arranged in a spiral geometry that distributed stress with extraordinary efficiency, the same structural principle used in the Eiffel Tower. Maximum strength at minimum weight. Additionally, its body contained an extensive system of air sacs, not just lungs, but interconnected chambers running through the neck, chest, and even into the cavities of the wing bones. These air sacs served 2 purposes. They reduced the animal's effective density, and they provided a continuous supply of oxygen to flight muscles during sustained activity. Hatzegopteryx was not a solid animal that happened to fly. It was, in structural terms, closer to an inflatable steel framework. Solution 2. The quadrupedal launch. Birds take off on 2 legs. They push with their hind limbs, achieve minimal clearance from the ground, and then engage their wings. This system works for birds. It would have shattered Hatzegopteryx's hind legs under the load. Pterosaurs took off on 4 limbs, and in Hatzegopteryx, The forelimbs, the wing arms, carried approximately 60% of the total muscle mass in the body. The shoulders and arms were the most powerful structures in the animal. The launch sequence. Hatzegopteryx crouched, shifted its center of gravity forward, over its wrist joints, compressed every muscle in its body into a loaded spring, and then exploded upward. The forelimbs drove the entire 280-kilogram body 2 to 3 meters into the air in a single motion. At the apex of the jump, before gravity could reclaim it, the 1-2-meter wings unfurled and drove downward. One stroke, and it was airborne. Takeoff velocity, approximately 60 kilometers per hour, generated in under 1 second from a standing start, on uneven forest floor, with no runway. The physics did not prevent this. The physics enabled it once the right architecture was found. When Hatzegopteryx was on the ground, which, fossil evidence suggests, was most of the time, it did not look like a flying creature. It looked like something evolution had built from scratch for terrestrial dominance. Standing fully upright with wings folded, it reached 5 meters in height. It could see over the canopy of the low-growing Hateg Island vegetation. It moved on 4 limbs, the folded wing arms functioning as front legs, with a long, smooth, energy-efficient stride. Fossilized trackways found in Romania show a gait pattern closer to a large mammal than to the shuffling of modern crocodilians or the waddling of modern birds. It did not scuttle, it walked, deliberately, confidently, because nothing on Hateg Island had ever given it a reason to hurry. A clearing in the Hateg forest. Late morning, the mist from the river had burned off, leaving the air heavy and still. Magorosaurus, a sauropod the size of a large horse, its long neck reaching toward the lower branches of a cycad, was feeding. Its eyes were positioned on the sides of its head, giving it wide-angle coverage of the surrounding tree line, a standard herbivore defense against predators approaching from ground level. It was not watching the sky. The shadow came first, a dark shape passing over the clearing, briefly blocking the sunlight from above. Then the sound, not a roar, not a screech, but the deep, rhythmic beat of wings decelerating, the rush of displaced air. Hatzegopteryx landed at the edge of the clearing with a weight that the ground registered, 5 meters tall. 3-meter skull tilted downward, cold eyes fixing on the Magorosaurus, with the unhurried attention of something that has never needed to rush. The sauropod turned, saw, could not process what it was seeing, because nothing in its evolutionary history had prepared it for a predator that arrived from above and stood taller than the trees. It took 2 steps backward, then stopped. Hatzegopteryx covered the distance between them in 3 strides. The attack was not elegant. It was not precise in the way of a hawk or a heron. It was structural. Hatzegopteryx pulled its neck back, coiling the massive muscular column like a spring, and drove its skull forward with the entire force of those neck muscles applied through a beak tip concentrated to a point. The impact force, biomechanical analysis suggests, was sufficient to shatter the vertebral column of an animal the size of Magorosaurus in a single strike. The Magorosaurus did not struggle for long. And for smaller prey, a juvenile dinosaur, a lizard, anything under a certain mass threshold, Hatzegopteryx did not bother with the hammer strike at all. It simply opened its jaws to their maximum gape, 1/2 meter wide, tilted its head back, positioned the prey at the opening, and swallowed. Alive, whole, still moving as it slid down a throat, built like an industrial pipeline. On Hateg Island, there was no safe place. The clearings were hunting grounds, visible from above. The forest understory was walkable for a 5-meter predator. The water's edge was the only partial refuge. Hatzegopteryx avoided deep water. But no terrestrial animal can stay submerged indefinitely. Everything on Hateg Island lived in the shadow of something that could arrive from any direction, at any time, making almost no sound until it landed. Here is a question that the fossil record of Hateg Island raises, and that nobody talks about. The island was isolated, but isolation is never perfect. Sea levels in the late Cretaceous fluctuated. There were periods when land bridges, temporary, narrow, but crossable, may have connected Hateg Island to nearby landmasses. And during those periods, animals crossed, not in large numbers, not frequently, but occasionally. Something from the outside world arrived on Hateg Island. What happened when a theropod, a large carnivorous dinosaur, a relative of the tyrant lineage, walked onto an island where the apex predators weighed 280 kilograms and arrived from above? we have indirect evidence that theropods were present on Hatig Island at various points. Fossil fragments suggest that at least some carnivorous dinosaur material is present in the formation, though identifications remain contested. But we can reconstruct what such an encounter would have meant, using what we know about the biology of both animals. A large theropod, even a modest one, a mid-sized tyrannosaurid or a large abelisaurid, was built for ground-level confrontation. Everything about its sensory system was calibrated for horizontal threats, the movement of prey across open ground, the approach of rival predators through tree lines, the sound of footsteps transmitted through the earth. It was not calibrated for the sky. Hatzegopteryx, by contrast, was specifically built for an attack angle that no ground-based predator had any evolved response to. It approached from above. It landed with minimal warning. And critically, its attack method, the downward hammer strike, was targeted at the dorsal surface of its prey, the back, the spine, the area that a quadrupedal or bipedal land animal almost never needs to protect, because nothing in the evolutionary history of terrestrial predation has ever attacked from directly above with a 3-meter skull moving at full velocity. A theropod encountering Hatzegopteryx on Hatig Island would have been in a situation with no evolutionary precedent. Its defensive behaviors turning to face a threat, vocalizing to intimidate, using its own jaws as a weapon, were calibrated for face-to-face confrontations. Against an animal that attacked from above, descending vertically, those responses were misaligned. The Hatteg fossil beds contain bones of herbivores with crushing injuries, inconsistent with tooth marks, injuries more consistent with impact trauma. Bones that were not bitten through but compressed, shattered from above. The valley did not distinguish between herbivore and carnivore, between prey species and predator species, between creatures that belonged to the island and creatures that had wandered in from outside. On Hatteg Island, the sky was the apex. Whatever walked beneath it, whatever it was, whatever it had been elsewhere, was potential food. Hatzegopteryx is the most studied, most complete, and most terrifying of the Hatteg Island pterosaurs. But it was not the only flying predator in this ecosystem. The Hatteg Formation has yielded remains of at least 2 other pterosaur species, smaller, less completely known, but present. This is significant because it suggests that the aerial predator niche on Hatteg Island was not occupied by a single species, but by a guild, multiple flying predators of different sizes, potentially targeting different prey in the same ecosystem. In modern ecosystems, guilds of predators occupying the same geographic area divide resources through size partitioning. Eagles take large prey, hawks take medium prey, falcons take small prey, and birds in flight. The system allows multiple predators to coexist without direct competition, destroying the population of any single species. On Hatteg Island, the evidence suggests something similar. Hatzegopteryx, the largest, heaviest, most terrestrially adapted, likely focused on the largest available prey, Megarosaurus adults. Large hadrosaurs, anything heavy enough to justify the energy cost of a full hammer strike. The smaller pterosaur species on the island would have focused on juveniles, lizards, smaller dinosaur species, and eggs, filling the ecological roles that smaller aerial predators fill in every modern ecosystem. This means that on Hatteg Island, the danger was not one animal, it was a system. Multiple species, multiple size classes, all targeting the terrestrial fauna from above, dividing the available prey so completely that essentially nothing was safe. The valley was not patrolled by a single monster, it was managed by a sky full of them. Hatzegopteryx had solved every problem Hatteg Island posed. It had solved the problem of size becoming large enough to dominate every terrestrial animal on the island. It had solved the problem of flight engineering, a body that could take off despite weighing 280 kilograms. It had solved the problem of predation, developing an attack method that no prey animal had any evolved defense against. It had optimized itself to absolute perfection for this specific island, and that was precisely why it could not survive what came next. 66 million years ago, on an ordinary afternoon over the Yucatan Peninsula in what is now Mexico, a rock 10 kilometers wide struck the Earth at 70,000 kilometers per hour. The energy released was equivalent to 1 billion nuclear weapons detonating simultaneously. The immediate destruction, the firestorm, the shockwave, the mega tsunami killed everything within thousands of kilometers of the impact site. But the slow killer was the darkness. Billions of tons of ash, sulfur, and pulverized rock entered the stratosphere and stayed there. For months, for years, the sunlight that had maintained the Haiteg Island ecosystem, warming the shallow seas, feeding the plant life, sustaining the food chain from the ground up, was blocked. Plants died first, then Magorosaurus, which ate the plants, then Telmatosaurus, which ate the plants. The entire herbivore base of the island's ecosystem collapsed within years of the impact. And Hatzegopteryx, which required an enormous caloric intake to fuel a 280-kilogram high-performance flying predator body, found itself in a world where the food had simply ceased to exist. It could not switch to seeds. It could not survive on insects. Its body required large prey, and large prey required a functioning food chain, and the food chain had been severed at its base. It could not fly to safety. The entire planet was dark. Every ecosystem on Earth was collapsing simultaneously. There was no destination that offered more food than Haiteg Island. The sky monsters of Haiteg Island died on their island, not in combat, not from a superior predator. From an empty stomach, in the cold and dark, beside the bones of the animals they had ruled for millions of years. When the last Hatzegopteryx took its final breath, it took with it the proof of something that has never been repeated in the 66 million years since, that a flying creature can exceed every supposed limit of its form. That physics can be bent, not by ignoring its rules, but by finding solutions to those rules that evolution has only discovered once. The natural world has rules. The sky belongs to the small, the ground belongs to the powerful. Predators attack from the same level as their prey. Nothing that flies weighs 300 kilograms. Haiteg Island broke every single one. For millions of years, in a sealed-off valley surrounded by ancient sea, evolution ran an experiment that the rest of the world never witnessed. It took the creatures of the sky and made them into ground hunters. It took the giants of the land and compressed them into prey. It built flying predators heavier than tigers and taught them to strike with the force of a collapsing building. And then, 66 million years ago, a rock ended the experiment. The valley went dark. The sky monsters starved. And the island that had spent millions of years rewriting the rules of nature became just another geological formation, its secrets locked in limestone and clay, waiting for paleontologists with microscopes and CT scanners to find the evidence of what once flew there. The next time you look up at the sky and feel safe because nothing up there is dangerous, remember Haiteg Island. Remember that the rules of nature are not laws, they are defaults. And somewhere in the fossil record, there is always proof that evolution, given enough time and enough isolation, will break every single one. Which part of the Haiteg Island story shocked you most? Drop it in the comments below. If this changed how you look at the sky, share it with someone. Subscribe and turn on notifications next time we go somewhere just as dangerous.